It's 2016 and the United States is spreading a little democracy in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, in Russia, 5 years have passed since the ultranationalist party came to power after winning the Russian Civil War in 2011. They have consolidated their rule and have started to ramp up their military expenditure, which has resumed the Cold War between the United States and Russia. Also, there has been a split in the ultranationalist party into two factions: an extremist wing led by Vladimir Makarov that wants to destroy the United States and establish Russia as the global superpower as soon as possible, and a moderate wing led by President Boris Vershevsky that wants to rebuild Russia first and focus on destroying the United States later. In the meantime, a critical event occurs. A highly advanced American surveillance satellite has crashed on Russian soil. It was equipped with the ACS module, which contains sensitive data and encryption codes related to the entire US satellite defense network, including early warning signs and radar capabilities. In response to this disaster, the US government sends two elite soldiers to the snowy mountains of Kazakhstan, named Captain John Soap McTavish and Sergeant Gary Roach Sanderson from Task Force 141, to retrieve the module before the Russians can crack it and get their dirty hands on that data. And the two successfully take on an entire unit of Russian soldiers and escape with the module nearly unharmed. Elsewhere, Makarov, frustrated by President Vershevsky's tolerant stance towards the West and growing increasingly impatient to enact his vengeance, begins orchestrating terrorist bombings all across Europe using his personal and party resources. To counter these attacks without triggering a full-scale war, General Shepard of the US Army recruits a new Task Force 141 member named Private Joseph Allen to infiltrate Makarov's inner circle and feed intelligence back to the US government. And with Allen in tow, Makarov executes his most devastating terror attack yet, a mass shooting at Zakhaev International Airport in Moscow. However, this turns out to be a false flag operation designed by Makarov to frame the United States as the perpetrators. He ensures this by killing Allen at the scene and leaving his body behind, making it appear as though an American operative was responsible for this attack. And in the aftermath, the American and Russian governments have a diplomatic fallout. And to convince Russia that this was Makarov's doing, the Task Force 141 starts gathering intel and tracks down the location of Makarov's primary arms dealer, Alejandro Rojas, in Brazil, and immediately goes there to capture him in hopes of gathering enough evidence. 141 manages to apprehend Rojas, and the mission is a success. But alas, despite the best efforts of the US government, disaster strikes anyway. Using the compromised ACS modules, the Russians bypass America's early warning systems and launch a massive surprise invasion. Millions of Russian soldiers are deployed directly onto US soil, landing simultaneously on both the east and west coasts before the Americans can react. And with this act of aggression, Russia officially declares war on the United States of America. The war situation looks dire for the US from the very beginning. Many units are ordered by the Army Central Command to hold out the Russian forces to the best of their abilities, without expecting any reinforcements. But without a cohesive strategy, they are overwhelmed and most of the soldiers are eventually ordered to retreat, while the Russians continue to seize more and more territory across the country. Meanwhile, the Task Force 141, along with many other American units fighting overseas, are left stranded without any support. While the fate of the other forces remain unknown, 141 manages to escape Brazil with the help of a former ultranationalist double agent named Nikolai, who extracts them via helicopter. The Russians have begun pushing deeper into American neighborhoods, seizing highways, suburbs, and key infrastructure. Every house becomes a front line, and the US is forced to adapt to a new kind of warfare: domestic urban combat. And even after their superior training, American forces are overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the invasion. But still, the US military desperately tries to hold its ground by deploying all available assets, such as Honey Badger IFVs and Predator drones, to fight back both in the suburban and urban areas, all while evacuating civilians and key government personnel. The Task Force 141, in coordination with the US Navy's 6th Fleet, is deployed to the Russian Far East, deep in the unforgiving cold of Siberia, to extract a prisoner from the Gulag known only by the number 627, who is believed to possess crucial information about Makarov's location and plans. To enable the Navy's advanced and aerial bombardment capabilities, 141 targets and captures a heavily guarded oil rig used to house surface-to-air missiles that were protecting the Gulag from naval airstrikes. And with the air defenses disabled, the Navy moves into position, and 141 begins their assault on the Gulag. The Gulag is more a fortress than a prison, built with thick stone walls and filled with a vast shadowy network of narrow hallways and overcrowded cell blocks designed to house thousands of inmates. After pushing through heavy resistance and guards, 141 finally locates prisoner 627, only to discover that it's none but our bro Captain John Price from Modern Warfare 1. And after a brief reunion between Soap and Price, the mission takes a dire turn. The Navy initiates the bombardment early, due to a narrow strike window before the Russian air defenses come back online. And with explosions beginning to rain down, the Task Force 141 escapes the facility just in time. Back in the US, the army has assembled a massive force near Washington, D.C. to begin retaking the city, and brutal fighting erupts across both land and air. While American forces manage to gain some ground in intense urban combat, the Russians maintain clear air superiority, making it very difficult for the US to fully reclaim the key territories even after heavy casualties and relentless effort. Back in the Russian Far East, the Task Force 141 is deployed to track down Makarov, this time with Captain Price rejoining the team. But Price seems a bit too excited to end the war as soon as possible, and despite direct orders from General Shepard not to do anything crazy, Price goes rogue and hijacks a Russian nuclear submarine and launches a nuke, aimed straight at the east coast of the United States of America. But the nuke doesn't hit any US land. It detonates across the upper atmosphere, which results in an EMP that knocks out electricity across a large portion of the east coast, and ironically this plays to the advantage of American ground forces, as it disables all the aircrafts, both in the American and Russian side, effectively restricting the war on this side exclusively on the ground. And the US Army, seizing the opportunity in the chaos, successfully pushes forward and retakes the White House and the whole of Washington, D.C. Later, General Shepard is given a blank check to end the war by any means necessary, and his first action is to send Task Force 141 on two simultaneous missions, one to the Caucasus Mountains and another to an airfield in Afghanistan, to track down and kill Makarov, believing that killing him will bring an end to the war. In the Caucasus Mountains, Ghost and Roach lead a sizable assault force against an army of Makarov's mercenaries. Although they fail to find Makarov himself, they do uncover a hidden safe house with an enormous amount of data of his operations. So they extract all the data while fending off mercenaries from the safe house, and head to the designated extraction point to hand it over to General Shepard. And this is when one of the biggest betrayals in gaming history happens. Shepard shoots both Roach and Ghost in cold blood, because that intel contained damning evidence against him, evidence he couldn't afford to let fall into anyone else's hands. It turns out Shepard wasn't just trying to win the war, he was out to make a legacy for himself. Shepard was in on the whole thing with Makarov on planning his no-Russian mission to start World War III, and he was the one who intentionally sent Alan as a pawn to Makarov to frame the United States. The two weren't allies, but they shared a similar interest of unleashing chaos for personal glory, and to become a hero in the eyes of their nations, if their side wins. And Shepard also orders his men to kill Soap and Price in Afghanistan, but they escape the place after a desperate firefight, and again with the help of Nikolai. After narrowly escaping death, both Soap and Price have become the two most wanted men by the US government. Realizing their lives are basically over either way, they decide to go out with a bang. They're launching a suicide mission to kill Shepard at his heavily fortified military outpost located in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, where Shepard has hired hundreds if not thousands of mercenaries to protect him, and Price and Soap charge in without flinching, fully embracing their super soldier status as they tear through wave after wave of enemies like it's just like old times. The mission climaxes in a high-stakes boat chase, where Price and Soap take down an entire battalion of mercenaries while relentlessly pursuing Shepard. As the chase escalates, Shepard boards a helicopter to make an escape, but Price manages to shoot it down and the chopper crashes. But alas, Price and Soap fall down from a waterfall, which deeply wounds the both of them. Battered and bleeding, Soap drags himself through sheer willpower to finish the job. He eventually finds Shepard, who's trying to crawl away. Soap lunges at him with a knife, but Shepard quickly overpowers him and brutally stabs the blade into Soap's abdomen. And as Shepard begins his villain monologue while preparing to finish Soap off, Price shows up and tackles him, and the two get into a savage brawl. And in one final act of defiance, Soap rips out the knife from his gut, enduring severe pain, and throws it straight into treacherous Shepard's right eye, which kills him instantly. Moments later, Nikolai arrives in a helicopter to extract the two wounded soldiers. The mission is over. The war may not be won, but Shepard's betrayal and treachery is finally avenged. If you'd like to see more video game war stories explained through maps, consider subscribing my channel. In the meantime, check out my Far Cry 3 and Mass Effect 3 videos. Peace be upon you.